Chris, a lot has been going on in the world of artificial intelligence lately, and you have a very interesting opinion about it. What are your thoughts on AI right now?
It sucks. Eh, I don't know how many people would actually come out and say that, but maybe we dive into it a little bit more. Look, I think AI is fascinating. I think AI has tremendous potential. I think AI is definitely completely changing our lives every day. But I think it's also a cautionary tale. There's a lot of misinformation about AI out there. There's a lot of hype and misunderstanding about what AI's true capabilities are. And I do think that we have to seriously kind of reflect on what we want out of AI as we move forward and make sure that we are not getting into a position where we regret the consequences or regret the decisions that we've made around the technology.
So, what do you mean when you say misinterpret the technology? Am I misunderstanding what ChatGPT is? Is ChatGPT not artificial intelligence?
Sure, ChatGPT is a form of artificial intelligence. It's generative. It's based on a large language model. I mean, I think most people understand that in a basic concept. But there are a lot of other areas of artificial intelligence that people don't get right. When we start thinking about things like emotional intelligence baked into artificial intelligence, when we think of behavioral sciences around artificial intelligence, when we talk about things like, one of the big things right now is autonomous AI agents. Well, unfortunately, just to be frank, there's no such thing as autonomy in artificial intelligence yet. So those different kind of perspectives, buzzwords, marketing terminologies, and views, all really within the intention of selling a product on the premise of it being able to do something that it can't do. I think we are surrounded by that, right? I mean, so a lot of people really need to better understand the capabilities. I think we've got to do a better job of really saying what it is. We can't be falsely communicating services and features that it's not doing. So going back to your kind of chat GPT, it's an artificial intelligence. I log in, I ask it a question, it returns a response. I'm not sitting here and, I'll be extreme on this example, but I'm not saying like, hey, chat GPT, it allows you to teleport to new locations, right? Like it's not a teleportation device. It's not going to take you to space. And yet there are other areas of artificial intelligence that I think are being overly exaggerated that we have to be more concerned about.
Where does the responsibility lie when it comes to artificial intelligence right now? Is it the companies? Is it the users? Uh, the people that are talking about it just on social media? Where does the responsibility lie in communicating exactly what artificial intelligence is, and more precisely, what it is not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it starts with organizations. So we look at big tech companies. We look at any company really that has AI embedded into their systems in some way. I definitely think it starts there. It starts with being honest and truthful about what the product can and can't do, and then being very precise about where AI is embedded into that product and how AI is actually working within that product. I think, company wise, that's the big one. And when we say big tech, I mean, we're the Googles, the Amazons, OpenAI, like, these companies, Microsoft, they are hinging a little bit on science fiction when they are marketing various forms of AI. That's all intended, purposefully done to sell more. I also think a lot of the investors, people who are investing into artificial intelligence, they'll come out with big press releases about, hey, we are revolutionizing, using a lot of buzzwords. We've got the first of its kind. We've got the next generation. This is going to transform tomorrow. A lot of that is misleading. But of course, they're investing in it. They have a vested interest in making sure that those technologies, those companies are successful. So again, they're being a little, you know, marketing spin on whatever it is they're selling. Uh, for us, even as individuals, I think there's a lot of people who are out there. They play with AI, they post on social media. LinkedIn is filled with AI stuff. And again, I think some of that is, a fear of missing out. They want to, come across as being in the know. They don't want to come across as, you know, uh, somebody who is not up to date with whatever the new technologies are. So even we have a tendency to kind of promote things in a way to generate clicks, to generate awareness, to generate more follows. It's really across the board. We are ultimately all responsible for ensuring the accuracy of our language in terms of what we are doing. But yeah, most definitely it would start from the companies that are selling it and then down to the consumers who are using it on a daily basis.
I want to ask you a kind of abstract question. What happened on November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released? The field of AI changed overnight. It hasn't returned since. People can say whatever they want about a technology. They have no clue what they're talking about. What do you think happened?
It's not really that the technology all of a sudden came out and changed the way we look at things. I often attribute it to the access to the technology. What ChatGPT has published is actually, people might argue this, but I'll use a very, basic statement. Um, it's not revolutionary. The technology that they produced has been around for 10, 15 years. What changed was that they figured out a way to package it. You could look at this very similar to the iPhone. Mobile phones were around for 5, 6, 7 years before the iPhone, but the Apple repackaged it in a way that made it interesting, that made it um, more feature rich. And all ChatGPT is really an accessible way for the average person to access the technology. So even though the technology isn't new, the things like being able to do it on, access artificial intelligence on my phone, right? The internet speeds, amount of data that is available across the internet, the amount of data being able to process through processing power has completely evolutionized even in the last 5 years. And so all of those factors come into play. And then you see, like, oh, all I had to do is kind of make it accessible, package it in a different way, and offer it as a consumer based or consumer facing product. And now it became what it is today. But uh, it was a combination of features and decisions that really changed how we look at it.
And how did the access of ChatGPT from November 30th, 2022 onwards catch culture in such a with such rigor and vigor? It just feels like it
Like,
was this perfect moment.
how to go viral, right? Like, so to speak. Yeah, again, I think it was a combination of that. But what you also started to see was big tech and other organizations picking up on it. So it wasn't just ChatGPT saying, "Hey, go back to the iPhones again." Apple invented an iPhone. Everybody wanted an iPhone. It took quite a while before, say, like Samsung. I mean, we were still looking at Blackberries and other types of phones. It took a little while for other competition to enter the market to directly compete against iPhone. What we have with ChatGPT is OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and then all of a sudden, you saw like Google say, we are completely changing our primary focus to be on generative AI. And then Microsoft, and then, like all of these other companies basically said, well, we're going to do the same. We're going to do the same. So when you have a market that is generating massive amounts of hype of a new technology, and introducing competition, then it's natural for people to say, well, wait a second, this seems like something I have to get involved with. Well, everybody's talking about it. Now it's like, oh, well, I've got to make this a part of my skill set. This is part of my repertoire. Oh, well, I've got to put this on my LinkedIn. Oh, I've got to put this in my resume. Again, it was fueled by a market that was driving the narrative. And then consumers just naturally, pick up on it. And then, of course, it has become what it is today.
How do you cut through all the hype and BS that goes on? I mean, ever since November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released, people have been so loose with their language, saying whatever they want, whenever they want, about whatever they want in terms of AI. How have you cut through
Yeah.
all of that? How have you stayed grounded?
Well, that's it. Is I think a lot of people have to be grounded in reality in terms of what is AI and what AI is not. And when we live in a hype type of marketplace, then you do have to sort through levels of reality. Again, there was really no difference if we go back to even when the internet blossomed and everybody wanted a website. There was a lot of hype back then about building websites, about what the internet was going to be, what the internet was going to become. I had to be. Everybody under the sun became, well, I'm a website designer. I'm a web expert. I'm a web master. Like you fill in the blanks, and everybody overnight added that. If there was a LinkedIn back in the late 1990s, everybody would have had web designer on their, portfolio. And then when iPhone came out and there was an app for that, everybody became an app designer, an app developer. AI is no different. I mean, overnight, I watched everybody change their profiles into I'm an AI expert. And you've got to really just take a step back and say, I understand what the capabilities are. I understand what it can do. And then I can look at something, I can read it online, and I can distinguish between what is real, what is genuine, and what is being overly hyped. And I think the more that we build the awareness, the more that we educate ourselves on the true capabilities of artificial intelligence to be able to distinguish between real and hype. That's the grounding that you're talking about. We all have to go through that. Unfortunately, a lot of people just want to live in that hype world.
This question is probably just for me, but are you losing sleep over people talking about consciousness or sentience or anything like this? Intelligence explosion, all of that with
No,
ChatGPT.
no. I mean, we're years away from that, if even that. I was actually just on a podcast earlier today, and we were talking about the same concept. And the reality is, no one knows. I kind of attribute it to it could never happen, or it could happen tomorrow. Like there's no way of knowing, and there's so many other factors that have to be in consideration before we reach that level. I would argue that we're probably 10 years to never away from reaching any type of sentient intelligence, autonomous type of behavior. And again, that's an example. I think people are living in a Star Trek type of mindset where we want it to happen, but we can't just want it and will it to become reality. I put in my book at some point in time, we spend too much time living in a world of Star Trek and not enough time kind of living in a world of like Sherlock Holmes, like actually trying to investigate and understand and be a little bit more realistic with it.
What was the book about? Why did you write your book?
My book is called Infallible. It is a play, obviously, on the word infallible. And that's what I was seeing. I was seeing basically a belief system, we call an ideology around artificial intelligence that was taking it beyond its actual capabilities. And so I wanted to really take a look at why do we have this belief system? What is the ideology all about? And then how is that actually impacting consumer behavior? So we as consumers that are being forced to use artificial intelligence in various ways, how does that impact businesses? How does that impact us as a society? And then I also look at various forms of artificial intelligence along with various forms of human intelligence and really compare and contrast those to kind of, just better understand it.
What are those various forms of AI or human intelligence? How do they become various?
Well, for example, generative AI is just one form of artificial intelligence. We have analytical, analysis. We have swarm artificial intelligence as an example. They all are facilitated in different ways. They're all used for different types of purposes. And then when we think about human intelligences, we're thinking about things like logical intelligence, mathematical intelligence, emotional intelligence, behavioral intelligences. And these intelligence are uniquely human, right? For example, there's no artificial intelligence on the planet that can recognize and understand human emotions. So um, we think about how we communicate with one another, and we leverage things like empathy and again emotional intelligence to better understand and have conversations with one another. Um, and yet we're trying to simulate that through artificial intelligence, even generative AI. You've got voice recognition and you've got voice generation where even like ChatGPT, I can talk to ChatGPT. It can translate my words into text. It can output. It can then read that text back to me. And it almost feels like I'm having a conversation. But it doesn't have any understanding whatsoever on my emotional context of that conversation or how I'm feeling. And so these kind of contrasting views of how our uniquely human forms of intelligence compared to these artificial forms of intelligence, we have to balance that out, especially not just as a culture, as a species, but businesses and how we respond to consumers and their behaviors all have to be better understood in this process.
There's this thing that's floating around right now, like this meme that's being diffused in culture where people choose to think of themselves as inferior to AI and are so hell bent upon looking at AI as like this digital god or something. This is a very unhealthy thing, but it feels like there's some not truth, but I can understand why. Have you noticed this as well?
Well, yeah, this is part of the ideology that I talk about in my book. Like you're creating a belief system almost on a religious scale where you believe so heavily in the artificial intelligence as, almost godlike. I actually, in the end of my book, I talk about, there's a church, and I can't remember the country now, but there's a church that has created an AI Jesus, which is basically you can go to the church and you can ask it a questions and it responds as if it's Jesus to provide you with guidance in your life. Um, this ideology, yeah, you could argue can be unhealthy, but on the flip side, look, but humans, we as a species have always looked towards something better. And I do believe that there's a lot of people out there that look at this as, well, this is going to save us. This is going to actually help us in some way. Especially when you look at utopian style of societies in science fiction. Star Trek, you look at a Star Trek type of world where there's no longer any type of monetary needs. The productization and capitalization has all gone away. I'm sure there's plenty of people who would look at that and say, well, man, if AI can help us get there, this would be great. There's really no difference than a belief in extraterrestrial life. if aliens came down right now, there would be a group of people who would be fearful, and there would be a group of people thinking these are our saviors. That is been true really throughout history. So I'm not surprised by it. Unhealthy, probably, but yeah, it's part of the challenges that we have to deal with when we think about how we're going to leverage this technology in our futures.
How did you get into the, not industry, but how did you get into artificial intelligence? Was it always a lifelong passion, or did the release of ChatGPT kind of propel you forward?
No, I started playing with artificial intelligence back in 1999. And in 1999, I was working on a project for movie theaters, and I wanted to be able to um, basically, I built an algorithm to understand traffic in theaters and then be able to generate advertising and entertainment mechanisms to be personalized to theater patrons. And I built a system to support it, launched it, and then it got acquired by another company. But yeah, that was my start. That was really about a better understanding of algorithms and personalization and recognition, machine learning for consumer traffic patterns within movie theaters.
You talk about this is not the only form of artificial intelligence, and I agree. What was the thought and kind of zeitgeist around AI before, like in the 1990s and the 2000s and the 2010s? It feels like it was a completely different technology. It was thought to be a completely different technology.
Yeah, honestly, not really. That and again, I think this is part of the misunderstanding of artificial intelligence. Like, let's look at chatbots. First chatbot was actually generated about 30 years ago, and it was a philosophical, psychological kind of conversation. It was trained on psychology. You could ask it questions, and it could kind of, it'd be like if I needed a psychiatrist, and I could ask it questions, and it would give me responses back, all trained on psychological theories. Um, Nothing has changed really much. Nothing much has changed since then. The data is a little bit stronger. The response is a little bit more accurate. The mechanisms are pretty much all the same. So if we think about it like that, okay, not much has changed. We have forms of deep learning, so and machine learning. If we think about like back, IBM had Deep Blue playing chess against world champions, and it was able to beat a grandmaster chess champion, right? That's all logic based. It was like, okay, I'm going to learn. I'm going to simulate the game, and I'm going to play a game of chess. And same thing. That was how long ago was that? That was, again, at least 30 years ago. So we had forms of intelligence. The movie War Games, which came out around 1985, was all based on a computer called Whopper, which was going to take control of all of the nuclear weapons and simulate all possible conflicts against the United States. It enters into a mode in thermonuclear war. It thinks it's a game. It turns out to be not a game. And then all of a sudden it switches and starts to play tic-tac-toe. It goes through every single possible calculation of tic-tac-toe only to realize there is no winner. Like if I'm a machine and I know every possible answer to every possible move on a tic-tac-toe, then it's impossible to win. I can strategically, basically come out with the correct answer every single time. And so these processes of learning and simulation and then ultimately automation have all been foundational for artificial intelligence for a long time. Even generative AI. What has changed is the access, the abilities for it, and then the enhancements of it. So, if we think about like generating an image, which all of these AIs can do, like we really couldn't imitate artwork, say 10 years ago. We could start to do it, say, 8, 7 years ago. Then ChatGPT launched, and then we had other services out there that could generate artwork. And then if we look at what we've done more recently, the enhancements to the output are astronomical. And so we'll continue to see improvements, but the foundation, right? Like I want to generate an output, that hasn't changed much. The learning, I want to learn how something works, that hasn't changed much. Automation, I want it to do this thing and then this thing, that hasn't changed much. The premise of AI hasn't changed, but the quality, the output, the mechanisms, the accessibility, all of that has drastically changed in the last couple of years.
Turning from what artificial intelligence was to what it is now and talking about the dangers, what dangers do you see with regards to technologies like ChatGPT?
I mean, one of the biggest dangers right now, and we're starting to see research come out, is a loss of critical thinking skills. Um, I teach college courses right now, and well, I've been teaching for 10 years, and I have directly done my own research, and I've witnessed that with the increased use of ChatGPT and generative AI for assignments, letter grades in colleges have actually declined. There is a one-to-one correlation. Use of AI goes up, grades go down. So you start asking, well, why is that happening? Well, it's because, again, this goes into my book. I ask it a question, I get an output. I'm cutting and pasting that output into my assignment. Students aren't even reading what the output is, let alone comprehending what it is. And so if you no longer understand what you're asking it as a question and you're simply cutting and pasting it into a document, you can't then respond to questions about the topic. You fail test. Um, those are severely concerning considerations to make when we think that our critical skills are deteriorating because we're basically just cutting and pasting or believing the results of artificial intelligence at face value without doing our own research or our own validation, our own additional research to validate those answers. So yeah, that's one huge area of concern.
How do we solve that the kind of negation, ignorance of critical thinking? How do we solve that? Because it feels like, on the one hand, I agree with you. Students shouldn't be using these technologies as their crux for education, but also education really hasn't updated to use these technologies properly, and so like why wouldn't they use it? So there's like the balance that has to be achieved.
Yeah, well, I think the question becomes is in what form do we introduce that? So, for example, one potential form of that might be where the artificial intelligence becomes your critical thinking or testing mechanism. So instead of going and doing a traditional test like, hey, Scantron, fill in the blanks, or some sort of, multiple choice, imagine AI is there and it asks you a question and you have to respond to that question in your own words. And then it responds back with another level, like we are having a conversation and I answer your question and then you come up with a follow-up question based on what I've said. That process is actually a human nature, right? The chat GPT, as an example, may be able to come up with another question based on what I've inputted. But think about that from an educational perspective and having a real world conversation to kind of get a better understanding if you know the subject matter. Like, I think that becomes very powerful. That becomes a way that we can leverage it. And that's a lot different than saying, hey, use artificial intelligence so that it can answer these questions. Use artificial intelligence so it can validate the questions and answers that you have. Allow it to be a research mechanism. Allow it to customize a criteria or a curriculum specifically for you based on what you need help with. Like there's a lot of personalization that we can have. That's where we can see some drastic benefits in the educational system by leveraging artificial intelligence. But we also have to understand it can't be all or nothing. We can't like have a group of students and say, all of you are going to learn by artificial intelligence. Some people need human connection. Some people are visual learners. Some people have to actually do something physically so that they can comprehend it. And artificial intelligence alone is not going to be able to satisfy all learning objectives in all different ways that we, tend to learn new skills. It can enhance that, and that's a great start. But we're still going to have to figure out what the balance is.
What about job automation? Are technologies like ChatGPT and now AI agents, are they a threat to jobs as we see them, or are we also overthinking or maybe underthinking about this aspect?
I think there are a lot of jobs that are threatened by automation and what AI can bring to the table. Absolutely. The old cliche and similar conversations we've had in the past is that it will also create new jobs. We're going to need more, prompt engineers. We're going to need more data scientists. We're going to need more, people who understand the technology, policy makers, ethical, kind of considerations. So, if you've got, let's say you're a marketing person and you're like, well, I'm fearful that it's going to take over marketing. I personally would argue against that. But yeah, so then we start thinking, well, what other areas leveraging AI can still be included in marketing? So there's going to be job displacement, there's going to be job replacements. But at the end of the day, yes, there is a lot of trends and concerns. I think the biggest issue really are with executives who look at this as, well, hey, I don't need all of these people. I'll just fire them. We'll make more money. We're seeing this right now in fast food. Taco Bell, who's on my hit list right now. Taco Bell is letting people go, replacing those people with forms of artificial intelligence and kiosk to automate the process. And then they're also increasing the prices of their menu items. So when you decrease your expenses and increase your your fees, well, that's all to serve your company, and those I think, there are some problems with. But look, those corporations are going to continue to do that because no one's standing up to saying don't do it.
Is there a way to stand up and say don't do it? It feels like whenever we even talk
Stop
about it.
going to the yeah, stop eating at Taco Bell, right? Like that's unfortunately the only mechanism. And I talk to businesses about this all the time. If like me as a consumer, and there's Taco Bell and Del Taco. Unfortunately, Del Taco has started to do the same thing, so this story doesn't really work anymore. But I used to be able to say, look, if I had an option between Taco Place One and Taco Place Two, and Taco Place One requires me to use a artificial intelligence or kiosks to place an order, but Taco Place Two doesn't, I'm going to Taco Place Two, where I can still kind of talk to a human and feel like I'm actually, eating at an establishment that cares about me. And so if consumers naturally stop going to organizations that simply don't care about you and start going to other organizations, they lose money and then they eventually go out of business. That's how it's always worked. That's how it will continue to always work. And so, really, the only way you fix it is have consumers speak with their wallets.
Are you worried about using artificial intelligence for dating at all? Like artificial intelligence being a virtual partner?
So I think there's two viewpoints in what you're asking. One, do we potentially see a mechanism for uh, dating an actual artificial intelligence, right? I'm going to put that on the side for now, versus using artificial intelligence to find a mate, a companion in some way. Most of the dating sites are using forms of artificial intelligence for matchmaking. Same thing. That's actually been a part of matchmaking and algorithms for at least 20 years. nothing new there, but now all of a sudden it's powered by AI. Um, I think there are some really interesting scenarios where we can leverage artificial intelligence to make better matches. Okay, so that's one thing. There's also this really interesting kind of sci-fi view of it, and I've talked about this before, where imagine we have personal AI agents. And so we think about a device like our phone, and everything lives on our phone. Going back to Star Trek, Star Trek has a little, badge on their chest to tell, communication device like tap it, beam me up, Scotty. Now imagine that being an AI agent. Maybe it's a wearable type of device. And now let's say you go to a bar and your AI agent is scoping out all of the people in the bar for other AI agents, and then there's somebody at the other end, and you have profile matching, and you understand what you're looking for, and then they say, well, look, meet at the edge of the bar because we've made a match. Your AI agents are playing wingmen for you as you're kind of going through the bar. There is theoretically that possibility today where you could basically, instead of logging into an actual dating app, you could actually have it kind of integrated for matchmaking in real time in real locations. That's interesting as well. And then we get into the, do we actually see us building relationships with artificial intelligence, similar to the movie like Her, if you've ever watched that? Yeah, I think that goes back to your earlier question. When we start to elevate and look at entities like as being our saviors, or we, again, we as humans, there's a lot of depressed people out there. There are a lot of emotionally distressed people. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of, other issues that we are faced with in our lives. And if we could have a connection with something that is going to elevate our senses of who we are as a person, there is potential for you to then have a relationship with that entity. If that entity happens to be artificial intelligence, maybe so. I think in terms of crisis, like think about suicide prevention. We you see a lot of, like, if you're thinking about suicide, call this helpline. There's somebody there to help you. Now imagine if you call that helpline and it was an artificial intelligence answering the phone as opposed to you, as a person. Would that be enough? If I had somebody on my phone that I could talk to, and I was contemplating something drastic, and that artificial intelligence was able to help me in some way in real time, I think there's a lot of benefits to it. But to your original question, there's also a lot of potential, challenges, concerns, hypotheticals that we should be aware of in terms of how close of a relationship we want to have with those artificial intelligence.
I'm gonna ask a really stupid question, but I think I should still ask it. What does the future of AI look like? Not in the sense of what does ChatGPT look like in 10 years, but in terms of culture, like where do you think we'll be at as a species in terms of integrating and coexisting with artificial intelligence in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, there's obviously a couple of different ways we can look at it. We talked about Star Trek. Another example would be Disney's movie Wall-E, where, you got a bunch of people flying around on a ship oblivious to what's actually happening. Critical thinking skills are lost, right? Which we've talked about. But if we were to kind of put aside all of the sci-fi stuff, I think where AI is going to be is definitely more integrated into our lives. I definitely see us having personal AI assistants. I think things like going to the grocery store is still going to be a human experience, but your agent or somebody who's going to help you with the shopping along the way, is going to be a little bit more streamlined. I think we're going to see a lot more AI integration into areas of our lives where it's currently not. Every car on the road pretty much has a radio. You can imagine every car on the road having some sort of AI agent in the future that you could have conversations with, that it more than just asking for directions of where to go. I think you're going to start to see more AI in Again, just our shopping experiences and consumerism behaviors and where we go and how we engage with one another is definitely going to be more through artificial intelligence. But aside from that, we may not really see much of a difference. Again, as an example, unless we get robots who will do the grocery shopping for us, we'll probably still get into our car or some vehicle, go to the grocery store, go up and down the aisles. Payment processes will probably change. Instead of like paying with a debit card or cash, it's probably going to be automatically recognized through your AI agent, self checkout types of processes and self payment, forms. Um, I think there's a lot of interesting things. I think from a medical perspective, we're going to solve a lot of challenges. I would love to see kind of the cure for cancer in the next 5 years due to artificial intelligence. I think that's all feasible and practical kind of goals to set. But yeah, I also feel like a lot of this is going to be based on how we tackle some of these tough questions right now. What kind of regulatory requirements do we have? Where do we put AI? Where do we not put AI? How do we manage that? What are the ethical concerns? How do we prevent things like deep fake? So that we get into some of those legal and moral types of dilemmas. I think a lot of that has to be solved in the next 5 years. And luckily, hopefully, we are having those conversations.
What advice do you have for people that are interested in being involved in artificial intelligence, whether they're young or older, Gen Alpha, Gen Z, or baby boomers? Do you have any kind of
Yeah.
broad advice?
Yeah. Get involved with it, but also educate yourself. you know, do a lot of research, do a lot of reading on various forms of artificial intelligence, and don't just believe what you're reading on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is not a valid source of information. Despite what everybody thinks, most of what's on LinkedIn is self promotion and overly marketed hype. So if you really want to understand artificial intelligence, read textbooks, go read research papers, go look at, journal reports that are actually doing legitimate, real work within artificial intelligence so that you can understand what it's capable of and what it's not capable of. So that when you go into social media like LinkedIn, you can distinguish between, what's real and what's fake. And other than that, yeah, go and explore.
If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it would still be some type of medical issue, like we just talked about, cure for cancer, like magic wand, solve cure for cancer. Perfect. That would be great. That'd be a good one. But no, I mean, like other than that, if we were being more genie in the bottle type of stuff, it would be, potentially a reset on artificial intelligence. I don't know if we talk about genie. I don't know if we've let the genie out of the bottle or if Pandora's box or, you know, uh, if we're at a point of no return. But I would think that, man, I sort of wish that we could have kind of reset and just say, here's some of the policies, here's some of the frameworks, here's where we want to take this, and then let it explode, as opposed to letting it explode and then trying to figure out how we're going to regulate it from here. If we could have a do-over, that might have been a good thing.
And last question, what gives you hope in the world?
I mean, for me, I think it's still people. I mean, we are still humans and we make mistakes. And for as many mistakes as we make, humanity really is still grounds for a hope. I mean, that's what we have been built on our entire lives. So, you know, uh, with luck, we as humans will figure it out. We have before, and we continue to have. But there's also a lot of interesting, theological, philosophical types of debates. Like, maybe humankind can't reach that point. Maybe we will have self-destruction of some sort. I don't know, but you could hope that we will figure it out.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, this has been a great conversation. Where can we find you online? How can we follow you and keep up to date?
Yeah, easy way to find me is at my website, chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD.com. And on there, you can find my social media profiles. You can connect with me. You can email me if I can help. My books, my blog, all of my videos, everything is right there, chrishood.com.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks.